Hi everybody. So I promised in my last video to try to be back sooner rather than later, and I am. And that's mainly because this is a very short book. This is Clive Barker's The Hellbound Hearts. Technically, it's not even a novel, it's a novella. 128 pages, which I read yesterday. I had a few hours free, so I decided to do something a bit shorter and something which is an incredibly important work in the recent history of horror fiction. So let's get on with it. The cover art I probably don't need to say much about because this isn't really the cover art of the novella. This is the film version of the story because you've got there Doug Bradley's Pinhead. You've got Claire Higgins there as Julia, Ashley Lawrence as Kirsty, Andrew Robinson over here as Larry, and some of the stuff around the edges there, some of it relevant, some not so. I'm not sure why the Manhattan skyline is there. It did appear in the third film, but it's nowhere in this. So yeah, this is very much just riding the coattails of the very successful film that came out of this. Right, here's the back then. You all know the story, I'm sure, but I'll read it to you anyway. The doorway to ultimate pleasure. At last he had solved the puzzle of Le Marchand's box. He was standing on the threshold of a new world of heightened sensations. In moments, the Cenobites, who had dedicated an eternity to the pursuit of sensuality, would be here. They would reveal dark secrets that would transform him forever. But with the exquisite pleasure would come pain beyond imagining. To escape his hideous tormentors and return to this world, he would need the help of his brother's wife Julia, the woman who loved him, but most of all, he would need blood. Yeah, so like I said, I mean, this is a fairly faithful, no, the other way around. The film Hellraiser is a fairly faithful adaptation of this book, The Hellbound Heart. There are a few small differences. If you haven't read this novella and you plan to, maybe turn this off now, this video off, and read it and then come back, because I will be pointing out some of the differences between the book and the film, but they are minor. Right, so the differences of these then, the main one is that Kirsty, the character of Kirsty, is not the main guy's daughter in this. She's a friend of his who's also in love with him. She's like a love interest. But rather than being the very, very beautiful Ashley Lawrence, in this book, she's depicted as this not so beautiful woman in comparison to Julia, who's stunningly gorgeous. The name of, in the film, he's called Larry. Here he's called Rory, which I guess is just another one of those concessions that Barker had to make to the American market when he made the film, because they had to dub many of the voices into American English and give it a kind of mid-Atlantic tone. That's really it, though. The ending is slightly different, but again, that's something that was forced upon Barker in the film version. There's this extra character added, that kind of homeless-looking guy who eats the bugs in the pet shop and transforms into some pterodactyl-like character at the end. There's nothing like that in the book, sorry. That again seems to have been a concession to a certain demographic of film goer at that time who wanted to see some more conventional monsters rather than these freaky Cenobites. So, all right, that'll do it for the differences between this and the film. I absolutely love the film. It is a masterpiece, I think. It is a classic, but the book is better, and here is why. I consider this to be a stone cold masterpiece, a truly flawless piece of fiction, sometimes verging on prose poetry. The writing in this is sometimes astonishing, as it would be in the early part of Barker's career. Everything from the Books of Blood up to Imajica, he could write passages that no one else in the field could, and was a master at blurring the line between beauty and ugliness. And like in this book, because Barker is very interested in the idea of boundaries and limits and how thin they can be, and how the differences between what lies on either side of those boundaries are not as stark as we tend to think they are. And that does involve, like in this novella, the blurring of the line between pleasure and pain, between what's taboo and what's perfectly natural, um, and morality as well. And I'll come to that in more detail in a moment. But Barker he was a very clever man, Clive Barker, very educated man, studied English literature and philosophy at university. And in his early work, he will juggle a lot with ideas of ethics and morality and things like that, what's right and wrong. And he will challenge conventional Judeo-Christian ideas of those things. The story, like I said, you all know, it's a basic Faustian tale of a man, Frank, who's he thinks exhausted the limits of human experience and he wants something more. Nothing satisfies him anymore. He's kind of emotionally dead to the world. And he's looking for higher reaches of experience. So he makes a deal with some kind of, um, I'll call them demonic characters, but in the novel, they're actually not demons like they are in the films. But okay, let's say that he makes a deal with darkness of some kind, and the darkness arrives, and they give him what he thought he wanted. Like I said, this is a man who has been burnt out by the world and is in need of something more stimulating than what the world can offer. So they give it to him. The opening chapter of this is one of the most stunning openings of any work of fiction I've ever read. It is unbelievably done. I mean, in the film, Frank, it takes all of about 45 seconds a minute for Frank to open the box and the Cenobites to come and rip him apart. But here it is described so sensually. I mean, Barker is such a sensual writer. He really does evoke the the terror of this man Frank when he starts to understand what really is going to happen to him. The way that his senses get heightened is depicted in such a way that I was starting to feel what he was feeling. Um, and just so imaginative. It can be easy to take for granted just how imaginative this story is because we're all so familiar with the Cenobites and with all these characters and the basic story. But I envy anyone who read this back in the day for the first time before the film had come out. I mean, this was published in an anthology called Night Visions 3, along with works by Ramsey Campbell and Lisa Tuttle. It wasn't even a major release, it was just buried away in an anthology somewhere. So, yeah, anyway, the story doesn't need much more description. What I'll say about the characters is that this isn't really a Cenobite story. This is a Julia story. And Clive Barker, he wanted Julia to be the main antagonist in the films after part two. His plan, his hope and vision for this franchise was that Julia would be the focus and the Cenobites would take a back seat. But the fans had a different idea. The fans really latched onto Doug Bradley's Pinhead, and so he became the focal point. In the novella here, yeah, the Cenobites aren't made that much of. They don't have that more prominent of a role. There's no Pinhead, for one thing. There's a Pin Girl. The only time someone is described as having these lines in the head and needles put into the intersections, it's not a man. It's described as being a young girly type character. So yeah, this Pinhead doesn't exist in this. And people say that Pinhead is the engineer because there's a character, the main guy called the engineer, but there's no indication that's true either. What I'm saying is that the Cenobites are different on the page to what they are on the film, which is obviously it was necessarily required because Barker was working to a budget, and I don't think there's any budget in the world that could have contained all the stuff that's in here and done it justice. So yeah, that's the first interesting thing. And about the Cenobites, what the main thing I want to say here, why I adore this, and kind of I feel like the film franchise missed a massive opportunity here. In the novella, the Cenobites are explorers of pleasure, and they're amoral. They couldn't care less about right and wrong, sin and redemption and salvation, all this stuff. It's not what they're about. They are just these creatures who try to explore all that experience has to offer. Whereas in the films, of course, from part three onwards, Pinhead and the Cenobites, they became these kind of bizarre pseudo-Christians, like always lecturing and moralizing to everyone. In the first film and the second film, and also this novella, like I said, they couldn't care less how you spent your life. If you were a good man, if you were a bad man, if you had sinned, if you were an angel, didn't matter. I mean, whether you were Frank or as in a sinner, or Kirsty as in innocent, they would take you and tear your soul apart and rip your flesh apart. It was all the same to them. Whereas if you've seen things like Part 5 film, Inferno, again, Pinhead is like some kind of Billy Graham with needles in his head, just rambling on and on about sin. And he's become this Christian preacher, basically, which I really didn't like. And this novel, I mean, why did they do that? Because this novella is so rich in possibilities. There are so many seeds in this that could have been planted throughout this mythology, and they didn't take the opportunity. Barker did the best he could with the budget he had for the first film. I loved the second film. I absolutely love the third film, even though I don't think of it really as a Hellraiser film. That we're getting into slasher territory there. But nothing that's ever been put on film can compare to reading this novella. Please do so if you haven't. It is an amazing experience. If you can try to put out of your head all you know of the Hellraiser, if you haven't read it, of Hellraiser, and try to, it's very difficult to do because they're so iconic, but try to get out of your head the images of Pinhead and the other main Cenobites and experience them as Barker first imagined them on the page. That's what I tried to do. And I've read this obviously many, many times, but each time I am just amazed all over again at the quality of the writing. It really does verge on prose poetry at times. And I kind of lost interest with Barker after Imagica. From his novel Sacrament onwards in the mid 90s, I found that his writing was the quotient of genius was getting less and less in each book, and he was relying too much on style over substance. There was too much purple overwriting, too much pretentiousness. Barker has one weakness as a writer, it's dialogue. His dialogue never sounds very natural. It's as stylized as his prose. And that's not a problem in this book, The Hellbound Hearts, because how natural do you need dialogue to be when it's coming out the mouth of Cenobites? But it is a problem when he's doing like love stories that he would do in books like Galilee and Cold Heart Canyon and stuff like that. So I think Barker is one of those writers who was so bursting with energy and imagination that it necessarily burnt out fairly quickly. He's still an amazing artist. He still paints images that are as good as any I've ever seen. And he still has good ideas, but his most recent books, like Mr. Begone and the Scarlet Gospels, they reads like a very different kind of writer who isn't writing with the same burning, white-hot energy that he was when he was in his late 20s and early 30s. That's a shame, but not entirely his fault. I mean, he is a very ill man now. He almost died of toxic shock syndrome some years ago, and the last I saw of him at a signing, he was confined to a wheelchair and looking incredibly frail. So God bless the man, and I really hope that he does recover someday. But I don't think we are ever going to get the third book of the art and the second Galilee book, and I don't think he's ever going to complete the Abarat Quintet. He's 3 books into that, but it just looks like everyone's lost interest in that, including publishers. I don't even think he'll find a publisher for those last 2 books. Anyway, I'm saying this because I just wanted to say a bit about the man himself, Clive Barker, who I have met, and he's an extraordinarily generous and kind-hearted man. So I say again, just God bless him, and I really hope that he overcomes his physical ailments. The Hellbound Hearts, though, is where, other than the Books of Blood, where his writing career would start. And what a beginning it is. Amazing, fantastic. Now, one last thing I want to say is that other people, not filmmakers, have explored all that this mythos has to offer. So if you can get your hands on it, they're quite expensive. But in the 90s, a bunch of comics were put out, and they're very expensive to collect now if you want all of them. But you can get these 3 volumes of the best of those comics. And they are definitely worth picking up if you're into this mythology. They all contain a bunch of stories by different writers and different artists, all with different art styles. Some of the stories are absolutely amazing, and Clive Barker actually has one or 2 in this. So that was volume 1, and this is volume 2, the best of. I picked these up off eBay for about £20 each. That was a while ago, though. They're probably a lot more expensive now. And here's volume 3, which contains another bunch of the stories. Yeah, so try and collect those if you're into the Hellraiser mythos, and ignore the films from like part 5 onwards. Right, that's going to do it. The Hellbound Heart, then, a very important work to me. Please do go and read it if you haven't already. It's 128 pages. You'll read it in no time at all. Thank you for watching this one, and I'll be back soon with another review. Until then, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.